This is Lesson 8. Throughout the written exercises in this chapter, you'll learn how to import artwork from other Adobe applications, which is convenient to your workflow because chances are you're probably using Illustrator or Photoshop to create some of the assets for your movies. One of the great things about Flash is its natural ability to work with Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and other file formats from Adobe applications. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at how we can import Illustrator artwork or AI files using Flash CS5 Professional. To get started, go ahead and open up the flo8_video.fla lesson file. This document is basically empty with a single layer and keyframe, and you'll see right here we've got the library panel brought forward to show you that we've actually got nothing in the library right now, but we're going to change that by bringing in some artwork from an Illustrator file that we've worked on previously. Whether you're importing a bitmap image such as a JPEG, a GIF, or a PNG, an Adobe Illustrator file, or a Photoshop file, the process is all the same, which is kind of nice. We can go to the File menu and use Import to Stage or Import to Library to bring in just about anything we need in a number of different formats, no matter how simple or complex. Let's go ahead and go up to the File menu, and let's go down to the Import menu. Now you'll see here we have a number of different options for bringing in files from outside of Flash. We're going to focus on the first two, which are Import to Stage and Import to Library. Very often people confuse these two because, in essence, they do some of the same things. The big difference is Import to Stage will actually bring the artwork to the stage as well as place it in the library. Import to Library does bring the artwork into the library, but won't place it anywhere on the stage. You'll have to do that yourself manually by dragging it from the library. However, make no mistake, anything that you import into Flash ends up in the library whether you bring it to the stage or not. This is true of basically any type of outside file format. In this case, we want to bring the artwork to the stage and also bring it to the library. So we're going to go ahead and choose the first option, which is Import to Stage. In this lesson folder, go ahead and locate the batanimation.ai file, and this is an Adobe Illustrator CS5 file. Once you select this, go ahead and click Choose, Open, or Select, depending on your operating system. And here we see the Illustrator Import Options dialog box. Now, this special dialog box appears when you choose to import an Adobe Illustrator file. Let's take a quick look at the anatomy of this dialog box to see how we can maximize its potential. The first thing is if we look at the very top, we'll see that there's a Select Illustrator Artboard option. Now, for those of you who have used Adobe Illustrator before, especially in recent versions, you're familiar with Illustrator's ability to have multiple artboards. Now, what's cool here is that you can actually select whichever artboard you want to bring in. So if your document has multiple artboards, you'll be able to select between them here. In the case of our bat animation file, it only contains a single artboard, so we're going to leave this as is. Now below, what we're going to see is the layer structure of our original document. So this is exactly as you would see it in Adobe Illustrator with some minor differences. Here we see all three primary layers, which are labeled Position 1, Position 2, and Position 3. You can expand or collapse these layers to reveal their sublayers. You could also do this all in one shot by right-clicking or control-clicking and choosing Collapse All or Expand All, so you don't have to go through each one individually. Now, the powerful thing about this dialog box is it not only shows us the artwork and all of the layers contained within our Illustrator file, but it lets us go through each layer and carefully select which ones we want to bring in, as well as dial in options for each layer if we need to. First, let's go ahead and select the layer called Position 3. Here we're looking at it fully expanded, so we actually see all of the sublayers, or the paths rather, that make up this primary layer. Now we have the ability to either turn off the entire primary layer as a whole, and that'll toggle off all of the sublayers of it, or we can toggle off individual sublayers. So if there's a path or a shape that we want to omit for whatever reason, we can uncheck the checkboxes on the left to make sure that artwork doesn't come in. Now, by default here, most paths remain editable paths. We also have the option, if we select a specific layer, to render it as a bitmap or rasterize it. This is generally not a good idea if you want that artwork to remain editable and scalable, which it really won't be once it's rasterized or converted to a bitmap. The Import as Bitmap option can come in useful once in a great while, especially if there are certain things on the artwork that really won't translate well into Flash otherwise. There are not a lot of cases where this will be true. However, it's good to have the option there just in case. For now, let's leave the default, which is editable path. Now, what we can do is if we reselect the Position 3 layer, which is the primary layer, we also have a couple of options here. Again, we can import this as a bitmap, which means it'll flatten all of the artwork in this layer and rasterize it. Or what we can do that's pretty handy is we can convert this to a symbol for use in Flash. We've learned a bit about symbols so far, how they're handy for animation, how we can easily duplicate them, and there's a number of different things that symbols, especially in this case movie clips, will come in useful for down the line. So we can either bring the artwork in raw, or what we can do is we can convert this to a movie clip right within this dialog box. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking the Create Movie Clip checkbox. Now, we haven't gone too deep into movie clip symbols yet, and you'll notice in this particular case, one limitation, or what you may view as a limitation, is that we can't choose between symbol types. So we actually have three symbol types in Flash, which are buttons, graphics, and movie clips. In this case, we can only create movie clips, but that's okay because movie clips can actually do the work of all three symbols. Now, here we have the ability to enter an instance name. We're going to leave this blank. This doesn't become relevant actually until Lesson 9, where you'll learn about the significance of instance names. Here we can also set a registration point. You may be familiar with this from converting artwork to a symbol within the Flash environment. You know that you can always set a registration point, whether it be one of the four corners, sides, or the center. In this case, we're going to leave the default, which is the upper left-hand corner. Now, let's go ahead and collapse this layer. Now, you'll see we have the exact same options for the remaining primary layers and sublayers. Now, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to actually take out some artwork that we don't need. Since the original Illustrator file contains a bat in three different phases of flight, wings up, wings out, and wings down, we may decide to simplify our animation a little bit when we decide to create it. So this means taking three different positions down to two. So what we can do here is we can omit the second position altogether by just unchecking this checkbox. Now keep in mind anything you do in this particular dialog box, whether it's for an Illustrator file or a Photoshop file, does not affect the original document. This duplicates the artwork and only affects what ends up in Flash. So if you omit layers, merge layers, or whatever it may be, you don't have to worry that it's going to cause damage to your original file. It actually leaves it untouched. Let's go ahead down to position 1, and let's give it the same treatment as position 3 by creating a movie clip. Just by checking this box here, we're going to leave the registration point as is. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see there are icons set next to each of the layers and sublayers, and this indicates how that artwork is going to be brought into Flash. So we see here, wherever we set a movie clip, we now see a movie clip icon to the right. Wherever we have an original path, which is actually in position 2 here, we see that it remains a path, or just regular vector artwork. Now, let's go down to the very bottom and take a look at some of the options we have here. Now, the first thing we have is a drop-down menu labeled Convert Layers To. If we click on this, we'll see that we have three different ways that we can bring the original layers from the original file into Flash. Now, by default, Flash is going to try and import any original layer structure from the original file into Flash layers, which means if we have three layers in our original Illustrator document, it will try and create three layers on the main timeline in Flash. Most of the time, this translates pretty well. Sometimes the layer structure differs a little bit between Flash and other applications. For instance, Flash supports layer folders and layers within. Illustrator handles it a little bit differently, using the concept of primary layers and sublayers and so on. So sometimes you'll notice there's a little bit of a shift, but for the most part, the translation's pretty clean. In cases like this, where we've converted artwork into symbols, it actually simplifies things a little bit. We can also translate artwork into keyframes. This means that if your artwork contains layers that actually represent a sequence, for instance in animation, kind of like our bat animation file does, instead of translating it to layers, it actually translates each layer into a keyframe and places each layer sequentially on the timeline. We can also convert everything to a single Flash layer. This is good if you have a lot of complex artwork, aren't really concerned about the original layer structure, and just want to make sure you get everything onto the Flash stage. In this case, however, remember, our bat animation file, each layer represents a different state of flight, and we've preserved two of those states, position 1 and position 3. So rather than layering these, what we may actually want to do is sequence these on the timeline as keyframes. So what we're going to do is select the Convert Layers to Keyframes option. Below, we have a number of different checkboxes which give us some additional options for how the artwork is going to be placed in Flash. We have one checkbox at the top, which is Place Objects at Original Position. This means that it's going to try and preserve the original position of the artwork as it appeared in the original Illustrator file on the Flash stage. We want to leave this checked off in pretty much all cases. Now, the next option is Set Stage Size to the same size as Illustrator Artboard. Now, this is interesting because what this will do is actually force the Flash stage in your document to match the original dimensions of the Illustrator document. Now, this can be really good or really bad. It can be really bad if you've already set up your document in Flash, you have other artwork on the stage, and the stage dimensions are set that way for a reason, and everything works around that. In this case, we have nothing else on the stage at this point, so this may actually be handy because it allows us to preserve the original dimensions of the artwork in Illustrator. So what we're going to do is go ahead and check that off. We also have the import unused symbols checkbox. This is handy if you happen to use symbol libraries inside of your Illustrator document. This way it'll preserve anything that isn't actually on the Illustrator artboard, bring it from the Illustrator symbol library into your Flash library panel. We're going to leave this unchecked for now. Last but not least, we have the import as a single bitmap image option, and this basically is the equivalent of the import as bitmap we saw earlier. Pretty much flattens all of those layers out and rasterizes them. Again, this is going to be a much rarer scenario where we want to do this, so we're going to leave this unchecked for now so that we can keep our artwork editable and layered. Go ahead and click OK. And what this does is it completes the import, and if we look on the timeline now, we'll see that we have two sequential keyframes. If we hit the enter or return key, couple of times, we'll see as it plays back the timeline, which only happens to be 2 frames long, it actually plays back this animation sequence. That's because each of the 2 layers we brought in represented a different state of flight for our bat. Now, if we use our selection tool and we click on one of the bats, either the one on frame 1 or frame 2, and we bring our property inspector forward, we'll see that each one of these is a movie clip named the same as the original layer. If we want to edit this, all we have to do is double click the movie clip to edit it in place on the stage. And we'll see this is basically just grouped drawing objects and paths. And we can manipulate these using all of the drawing and editing tools inside of Flash just as we would in Illustrator. If you work with Illustrator or Photoshop and need as much flexibility as possible, you'll find that it's actually a joy to be able to work with Flash because it makes importing files from these other crucial applications easy and smooth, and gives us lots of options for how to translate that artwork once it hits the Flash stage. Let's go ahead and take a look at the library panel. And we'll see that for every document that we import, we have a folder inside of our library panel that represents that document. So you'll see it's actually named batanimation.ai. If we expand this, we'll see that the artwork from each layer is represented by yet another folder. And in this case, since we chose to group that artwork into movie clip symbols, we see a single movie clip sitting inside of each one. So what we've seen here is that if you like to work with other Adobe applications such as Illustrator and Photoshop, Flash makes it a breeze to import artwork from these other applications and gives us lots of options for how to translate that artwork once it hits the Flash stage.